The broadcast is now starting. All attendees are in listen-only mode.
Hi, everyone, and welcome to this webinar on digitalization, energy efficiency, and smart grids. This is Edith Bayer with the International Energy Agency. We'll begin the webinar shortly. Please bear with us for a couple of minutes. Thank you.
Hello, everybody. This is Brian Motherway from the International Energy Agency. You're very welcome to our webinar today on digitalization, energy efficiency, and smart grids. We're very pleased to welcome so many of you from many countries to join this webinar. Thank you for taking the time to participate. As you know, this was originally planned as an in-person meeting here in Paris, which didn't prove possible, but we're very pleased that so many of you could join us online. And in fact, this is the second webinar we've held today. We held one this morning in time zones suitable for Asian countries, where we had also a high number of participants, and we're looking forward to this afternoon's session. And I'd emphasize these sessions are meant to be interactive. We want to tell you a little bit about our work, but we will also hear from many excellent speakers from many countries, and we really want to hear from all of you. So you will have an opportunity to enter comments and questions via the question box on your meeting interface. And also shortly, you will have an opportunity to participate in some live online polling that we have lined up for you to garner your views. Equally, if you want to follow up with us after this event, we're very pleased to hear from any of you on the issues we're raising, and you can contact us on the contact points you already have, or you can get us on energy.efficiency@iea.org. So we do encourage you to follow up and stay in touch, because these discussions are about engaging globally with relevant stakeholders and experts, and that's why we're so pleased that so many of you have joined us today. So I'm just going to take 5 minutes to say a few opening remarks on behalf of the International Energy Agency that really explain why we are doing these webinars and where it fits into the program of work of the agency. And then we're going to hear a couple of keynote statements from some excellent speakers, followed by a range of international perspectives, and then have some question and answers. So first of all, from the agency's perspective, let me give you a very brief overview on the work of the agency on these topics at the moment. Like governments around the world, we're very conscious that digitalization is not a new topic, but it's certainly a growing one, and it has many existing and potential future impacts on energy systems. Some of them could be described as risks, some as opportunities. And this is a key topic for our governments around the world, and that is why we are focusing a lot of attention on analyzing what is going on at the moment, what might happen in the future, and providing evidence and analysis and advice to governments in terms of their own decision making and future policy making on this topic. Some of the key areas involve looking at the core imperatives of energy policy around energy security, power system flexibility, affordability and access, and of course, supporting governments in their energy transitions. Our power systems are facing increased pressures from many factors, including greater degrees of electrification, increase in variable renewable deployment, and distributed power resources. At the same time, we see a lot of opportunities where electricity systems can be part of clean systems of the future that enhance all of these imperatives we've referred to. So, but at the same time, we're conscious that for the most part, most of these technologies are still in what we describe as a pilot phase. We are not seeing large-scale deployment of many of the technologies that are emerging, and yet that is the direction of travel for all countries. And therefore, this is a good time to be reflecting on what we have learned, what data and evidence has accrued already, and what that means for the next phase. Let me just mention a few of the topics that we are looking at. First of all, for energy efficiency, we are very aware that efficiency is going through quite a substantial change in conceptual terms driven by digital technology. From a conventional view of end use of energy efficiency of all devices separately, we're already seeing interconnectivity in the home, for example, where devices can talk to each other or consumers can control them centrally. And of course, the next phase is to see that in a more grid-wide and system-wide perspective, where we start to think about energy efficiency, not just of end use, but of a whole system, where the demand side plays a stronger role in helping the integration of variable renewables and the optimization from an environmental and economic point of view of the whole system. But in that regard, infrastructure really matters. And we are aware that maybe this is a neglected side of things. And that's one of the reasons why this year in 2020, the World Energy Outlook will have a special focus on energy networks. And today's discussions will help inform that work. The critical question is, are electricity networks ready to meet the challenges that power systems will face in the future in all parts of the world? And we are aware that while global investment in electricity networks has been flat for the past couple of years, spending on digital grid technologies has continued to rise. Therefore, this raises a number of important questions for governments to consider and for the IEA to look at, including, are we taking electricity networks today for granted? How can networks be enablers of energy transitions, including what the role of the smart grids might be, and what do the next couple of decades look like in terms of technology development and, of course, policy, regulation, and market development. Equally, electricity security is a growing importance to all governments. And as you know, the IEA has been working on energy security since its foundation over 45 years ago. But never has electricity security been more of a focus than it is today. Modern economies just can't afford the kind of disruptions that electricity supply may be at risk at. And equally, all of our societies are more dependent on electricity across all sectors than ever before. Of course, electricity security is in some ways quite different to other types of fuel security, and that's why it requires special analysis and special attention. And later this year in the autumn, the IEA will produce a major report on electricity security, focusing, among other things, on the role of electricity in energy transitions, particularly in the growth of renewables and flexibility and the security dimensions of that. Secondly, of course, the all-important question of cybersecurity. And thirdly, the impact of rising number of extreme weather events on electricity systems and what that means for resilience and security in the future. And you will see that report being published by the IEA in the autumn of this year. One of the areas we're also looking at the moment is analysing how existing power markets should evolve in order to take advantage of the expanded capabilities brought by digitalisation. We now see many companies in many countries applying new technologies and new ways of doing things to bring flexibility, system balancing, or ancillary services to electricity markets by engaging large numbers of demand-side customers, often in their homes, in their offices, in their schools. And as markets face these kind of innovations, questions arise about remuneration, market design, regulation, and governments are facing these questions. Finally, to mention increasing system flexibility. There are many technologies now that can play both on the supply and the demand side in terms of their ability to participate in making systems flexible and hence more efficient, more optimal, and more resilient. Often we see that industry and technology are far ahead and continue to innovate in the ways of doing things that policymakers and regulators have to try to keep up with. And of course, this is particularly important as we move towards higher shares of variable renewable resources, driven in particular by wind and solar. So this creates integration challenges that I know all governments are thinking about, both from a technology and a policy point of view. And of course, digitalization plays a critical role in these areas, creating many opportunities for doing this kind of thinking and deployment in more enhanced ways. So these are just some of the questions that the IEA is currently looking at in terms of digitalization, smart grids, and related questions. And today we want to explore some of these with our experts around the world and with all of the people joining this webinar from many countries. And as I said at the start, we want to make this interactive. So we're going to start with an online polling question that I would encourage you all to participate in. And I'm going to hand over to my colleague Edith to talk us through that. Edith, please.
Thank you, Brian. So what we'd like to do now is to ask you to, either on your mobile device or if you have another browser that you can open, go to the website www.menti.com and enter in the code that you should be seeing on the screen here, but I'll read it out just in case. It's 450862. And the way that this works is you enter in the code and you'll see the question that you see up here. How far along is deployment of digital technologies in your jurisdiction in the following areas? Smart meter rollout, distribution system control and operations, transmission system control and operations, and automation and control technologies. And as you can see, as we get questions in, the responses will kind of slide around depending on what the responses are. So we see an average. And really the reason that this is the first question is that we're here to talk about digital technologies and about essentially what they can do for us and what they can do for power systems. But we need a reality check to start with on how far along we actually are in deploying digital technologies on the demand side and also in transmission and distribution networks. Automation and control technologies are also very important on the demand side, particularly among larger consumers. So as we can see here, and we conducted the same survey this morning, we're certainly not seeing many responses on the far right, which would be high deployment. And I think we have 78 responses now, so we'll move on from here. But I just want to note that we'll send around the response to this to the participants from the webinar. So if you're still answering, don't worry, your response will not be lost. And I'll hand this back to Brian now. Thank you.
Thank you, Edith. I think that was very interesting context setting. And do please keep your phones handy because we're going to be going back to the online polling in just a few minutes. But before we do, we're going to hear two keynote statements from two senior government officials, both of whom are well-known experts in this area, leading some very interesting and important thinking in their respective countries. So I know these are going to be very interesting presentations to hear what is going on in these countries, but also the strategic thinking that has been driven at the senior level by our speakers in particular. So our first speaker is Alex Fitzsimmons, who's the Deputy Assistant Secretary at the United States Department of Energy, responsible for energy efficiency and renewables and driving a lot of very interesting work on the role of digitalization. So Alex, we're very pleased that you're able to join us today, and we're going to hand over to you now, and the floor is yours.
All right, well, thank you for that very kind introduction, Brian, and thank you also for pressing on and finding a solution here. It's pretty clear we are walking the walk by having a digital meeting. So really looking forward to this. So thank you for having me. I just want to start by saying I think it's a really exciting issue. It's a very exciting time for us all to be working on this in the energy efficiency spaces. As Brian mentioned, we're reimagining the role that energy efficiency can play in the energy system of the future. We know that the energy system of the future will look different from the energy system of the past, and we have to adapt accordingly. We know that long gone is the era where we would simply use less energy for the sake of it, right? That's not what energy efficiency is about. It's about enhancing affordability, but it can also be so much more than that. We can reimagine an expanded vision for what energy efficiency can contribute and what the role of the introduction of new digital technologies can factor in. And really, the opportunity is enormous across multiple sectors, looking at transportation, manufacturing, building technologies, the power grid. The list goes on. But as the poll showed, in most places around the world, we're really just at the beginning. So it's an opportune time for the IEA and for us all to be collaborating on this issue. It's an opportune time for the newly formed Energy Efficiency Hub to start working on this issue in particular, because we really believe that energy efficiency will be driven increasingly by new smart technologies, connected digital technologies, which can help increase the energy efficiency, but also the affordability, which are not always the same things. But so I want to focus on a couple of those sectors that I mentioned and talk about how they interact with the energy system at both the distribution and the transmission level. So when you look at the manufacturing sector here in the United States, consumes about 25% of U.S. power, and that's a significant number, right? And we know that energy efficiency and new digital technologies in manufacturing is more than just about energy efficiency. It's about competitiveness, because just as we know that the energy system of the future will look different than the one of the past, we know that the manufacturing sector in particular of the future will look different than manufacturing facilities of the past. And so this is an issue of both efficiency and competitiveness in manufacturing. And at the U.S. Department of Energy, we're doing a variety of activities in this space. For example, we have what's called SESME, a Smart Manufacturing Institute, which is a public-private partnership that's funded at about $70 million over 5 years. And this institute is bringing together various stakeholders to look at various sensor and control technologies, new automation in the manufacturing sector, because of the potential to increase the efficiency, the competitiveness, and then even potentially the flexibility of manufacturing facilities, which is an important issue because we know the energy system as a whole is going to have to be more flexible to integrate a wider range of new technologies than we've ever had to before. So there's a lot of opportunity there. But just as there is a lot of opportunity to introduce new digital and smart technologies in manufacturing, there are also risks. There's privacy risks. There's cybersecurity risks that serve as really as obstacles or barriers to the widespread adoption of new energy efficient technologies in manufacturing. And it's totally understandable, because these are facilities that need to operate 24/7, 365. It's a matter of life or death. You cannot put the facility at risk. And so to try to get ahead of the looming cybersecurity challenges associated with the adoption of digital technologies in manufacturing, the Department of Energy is establishing a cybersecurity for energy efficient manufacturing institute. That's similar to the SESME Institute. It's $70 million over 5 years to really focus on the opportunity, which when we've done the math, we have found that the introduction of many of these sensor and control technologies on manufacturing floors could enhance the energy productivity of the manufacturing sector by 15% by 2030. But the adoption of those technologies is limited because of uncertainty and risks that are introduced from a cybersecurity standpoint. So attempting to develop and design new technologies with cybersecurity baked in as an initial requirement instead of having to bolt it on later is a major focus. And then also looking at the cybersecurity vulnerabilities across the entire manufacturing supply chain. So we're excited to get that institute started, to have it cooperate with the previous institute we have, and we're open to collaborating with any of you on that. But aside from manufacturing, the other sector I'll talk about today that's also vitally important is the building sector, because the building sector consumes 75% of U.S. electricity. That is residential and commercial buildings. A full 75% of the electricity that we use. So what does that mean? It means that if we are able to harness those massive loads, all of that consumption that occurs day in and day out in buildings where we spend 90 to 95% of our lives, then we're not just talking about opportunities to improve affordability and efficiency, but we're talking about opportunities to have much more dynamic and flexible energy consumption. Because what you can have, in effect, if you're able to deploy consumption flexibly without impacting the comfort of occupants in the building, is you can essentially have a virtual battery that's stored within a building's walls, but is also connected to other buildings. And so we're working on these new technologies. As Brian mentioned, many homes today have smart technologies within the home, smart connected individual widgets within the home. But what we're looking at now is how can you connect all of these new devices and technologies together? And here's an example on the screen now. How can you connect them all together within a building's walls, and then connect them within buildings, and then potentially to the electric grid to maximize the flexibility of our consumption? And that's an initiative that we're calling Gridit, that we have called Grid Interactive Efficient Buildings. It's something that we've increased our investment in, in the last few years. It's an exciting program that we'd be happy to collaborate with you on. One other example I want to bring up about this is, we really are trying to walk the walk here, and that's why we're excited to have announced a few weeks ago our intent to issue a major new funding opportunity called Connected Communities. And this program, it's about $42 million right now. We expect it to go higher in the future. But this is building on two successful pilot projects that we had funded a couple of years ago that are called Smart Neighborhoods. This is a public-private collaboration between DOE, Southern Company, which is a major utility here in the United States, and Oak Ridge National Laboratory, one of DOE's 17 national labs. And these neighborhoods, there's two of them, one in Birmingham, Alabama, another one in Atlanta, Georgia, and we were happy to cut the ribbon on both of these, are fully functioning neighborhoods that people live in, so that were built from scratch and that employ many grid interactive building technologies that we're talking about. They're efficient, they're connected, they're smart, and they're flexible, both within the building's walls and the capacity in the future to connect with one another and the grid. So the project in Birmingham was 64 single-family homes that integrate a variety of new technologies that we know are growing. So you have smart and efficient devices inside the home, from everything from the HVAC systems to the latest sensors and controls. But you also have solar panels on the roof. You have battery energy storage systems in the home, and you also have a community microgrid, a smart grid with a natural gas generator and solar panels. So, and we've been collecting data that neighborhood, 64 homes that people are living in, people bought them, and now they've moved in, and we're collecting the data, and we found significant energy savings even within the first year. We're looking at about 40% reduction in the electricity use inside these homes, about that same percentage reduction during peak demand, which of course is so important from an energy affordability standpoint, to be reducing demand during peak hours. And by all accounts, people are integrating these new technologies without impacting their comfort and productivity. So this Connected Communities funding opportunity that we're planning to issue in the coming months is an expansion of that Smart Neighborhood program. And, because we want to take this nationwide, because we understand, the United States is a large country with many different grid mixes, many different regions, both climatically, very different types of climate zones, of people, of states, and very different policy environments as well. And so we want to take this nationwide. We want to have about 6 or 7 pilot projects that, but we also want to expand the vision, because the projects in Birmingham and Atlanta were focused on new residential builds, but we're opening this up to potentially residential or commercial, new or existing, different mixes of technology. So we're really looking forward to that. We're continuing to collect the data. We're happy to share it with you to the extent that we can. We're going to be issuing studies through our labs on the results and the lessons learned. So we're really excited about this, because we understand, as Brian mentioned, that we don't know what the future holds. We've seen dramatic changes in our energy system over the last 10 years that very few people predicted, right? Very few people saw wind and solar costs coming down as rapidly as they have. Very few people saw LED light bulb costs coming down by 90% in 10 years, or lithium-ion battery costs dropping by 80% in 10 years. Very few people saw that natural gas prices would drop as much as they did, and that the United States would become the world's leading producer of oil and natural gas in the world. So I think we have to be humble about our ability to predict the future, but also optimistic about the opportunities that lie ahead, which is why I'm so excited to be a part of this collaboration with the IEA. Look forward to launching the Energy Efficiency Hub in the near future, and look forward to working with all of you. So thank you.
Alex, thank you very much. That was really great, and it was great to see how the US is embracing, as you described, the opportunity, and to really make it tangible in your presentation, the range of opportunities that arise from digitalization, to think about energy demand and energy efficiency in a different way. And while also seeing it as an opportunity, making the point that there are risks. In particular, it was impressive to see how fundamental cybersecurity is to your thinking in terms of the kind of deployment and rollout you're doing. So we're all going to be watching very carefully. It's great to see you have these real trials up and running and real data flowing. So we all look forward to seeing more of that data as it comes. So thank you very much for your presentation. Let's move on now to our second keynote statement, which comes from Alex's neighbor to the north, which is Canada. And we're very pleased to have with us Joyce Henry, the Director General for Efficiency in Natural Resources Canada, also very active on this topic. And I think we're also going to hear some very interesting thoughts from Joyce. So Joyce, thanks for joining us. The floor is now yours. Joyce, so far we can't hear you. Just checking in that you're still with us. Now we see you. Are you on mute, Joyce? No, I can see your lips move, but I'm not hearing you. So can you use sign language? Your mic's on, Joyce, is it?
How about now?
Great.
Yeah, can you hear me? Great.
We can.
Okay.
Over to you, Joyce. Thank you.
Okay, thanks so much. I want to say thanks to the IEA for, first of all, for continuing with this topic, despite us not being able to all be there in person. And I do look forward to a time when we're going to be able to come back around the table. Maybe I'll just also say thanks to Alex for the extremely interesting presentation on what's going on in the US in this area. I also just want to do a little check-in, Brian, and make sure you can see my slides and not just me. Can you see my slides?
We can see you, hear you, and see your slides. Everything's great, Joyce. Thank you.
Okay, perfect. Okay, so in Canada, we're using digital technologies already across end-use sectors, and I think we can say that we've already begun seeing a change in habits of Canadians as a result of that, and certainly, we're expecting increased deployment of these potentially transformative technologies, as well as other new technologies which will also impact energy use and how we want to deal with demand for new energy use. So that includes autonomous cars, intelligent home devices, more automated production processes, and so as a result of that, we certainly want to remain engaged with the energy efficiency community worldwide in terms of trying to find approaches and economies of scale and how we deal with both the challenges and opportunities that come with incenting more energy efficient outcomes through the use of digitalization. So I'm happy to share my thoughts a little bit more on this, and I'm just going to go on to the next slide. You have to bear with me as I figure out my technology to do so. Hang on, I'm just going to get a little bit of help from people more expert than me on this. Yep. Yeah, perfect. Okay. So maybe just to kind of set the scene a little bit, it's been predicted that by 2024, there'll be over 34 billion devices connected globally, and that's expected to grow as we get greater and greater levels of technology. And that, and as businesses and homes demand this level of connectivity. So as I've mentioned, this creates a lot of opportunities, also some challenges, but I think I'd like to focus at least preliminarily on the opportunities, both with respect to improved energy efficiency and with respect to the user experience. So digital technologies have the potential to increase energy efficiency by making energy systems around the world more connected, enabling identification of energy demands, and to deliver energy at the right time and in the right place. And certainly in Canada, the way we look at digitalization is how do we enable new ways of working to monitor and understand and influence energy use and energy efficiency at various scales in a responsible, secure, and sustainable way. I want to give a little example of that. We're looking at scaling energy efficiency across systems such as smart grids, which can add a lot of flexibility to grids for renewables and electric vehicle integration. And I think, Brian, you certainly spoke to that in your remarks. And maybe what I would say is that, when I think about digitalization, I think we're thinking about areas here in sort of maybe 5 different ways. The first is certainly with respect to smart grids, including smart meter technology and the flexibilities that can afford both the grid in terms of renewables and EVs and integrating them, but also just with respect to demand management and how we can do that through increased data and also through the sort of smart and connected buildings and cities. What does that mean for energy demand? What does it mean for demand side management? We're already seeing some interesting advances with respect to companies in this space and the innovations that they're presenting. Alex mentioned cybersecurity and cyber threats. That's also very much of concern to us, and we are doing a lot of work, including with the US, on that. And then the other piece I would say that we're looking at is and I'll get into this in a little bit more depth, but how we work within our own organization here in the Government of Canada and with other jurisdictions. I mean, Canada's a federal state, so we're always looking to work very closely with provinces and territories, with our municipalities, with utilities who are major players in this space for us. Our policies, our regulatory and legislative authorities, our standards around that, and thinking about, do we have the right underpinning as we move into the future, and at the same time, what role are each of these jurisdictions playing versus the role of the federal government? So I'll speak to all those things a little bit, but I guess what I would say is, we feel there are a number of important shifts in our thinking that we need to make as digitalization continues. And that means ensuring that we're thinking about devices as connected. We don't think that's an option anymore. We really are in that space, and we expect that to continue. Thinking about new business models, especially because devices can be owned and controlled by third parties and their services sold. So what does that mean? What does it mean to have energy and mobility as a service? And then paradoxically, now that we can better connect with people, how do we figure out how to monitor and connect with people in ethical and responsible ways? And I think that goes with the third party as well, or for the third parties as well, because increasingly we can send more real-time and personalized and relevant information to people. So how do we influence their decisions around energy use in a positive way, and not in a kind of creepy big brother way, if I can put it like that. Okay, I'm just going to move on to the next slide. This one. Right. Okay, so for digitalization to steward the energy transition, strong policies, very important, potentially legislation and regulation, guiding the tools around this. I mentioned that we're a federal state in Canada, so we don't own all of those tools at the federal level. So what we seek to do is facilitate and work closely with others in that space to enable the energy transition that we're trying to undertake. So we know that innovation is a really key part of that, and we're looking to improve our products and processes in that space. So Natural Resources Canada, which is where I work, it's a very science-based department, and we're providing significant RD&D funding to develop and leverage digitalization technologies that will improve energy efficiency in housing, buildings, and communities. So some examples of that from our federal R&D labs are with respect to intelligent building technologies, for example, where we're looking at supporting the deep decarbonization of buildings through intelligent energy management solutions. So that allows buildings to achieve a high level of efficiency, dynamically anticipate changes and adjust their operations, and play a proactive role in smart grid technology. I think the other piece that I might mention is something that is being undertaken in some of the private sector, but that is being supported by some of our work in our labs, which is to find ways to take into account our energy mix, which is, as Alex mentioned in the US, quite different across the country, and to leverage both our very clean grids, like for example in Quebec and British Columbia, where we have a very large hydroelectricity, coming from clean energy sources. But in areas, for example, in Ontario, which is the province that I live in, we have very reasonably priced natural gas. Our electricity prices are a little bit higher. At the same time, we're trying to enable new technologies in the heat pump space, for example, and we're seeing that there are new technologies that allow for intelligent switching depending on temperature and time of use costing. In Canada, obviously, we're a very cold climate, so we have some challenges with respect to heat pumps already. But when you match this, when you match a dual fuel heat pump with technology around time of use rates, it can make it very affordable, even in Ontario, where we have a grid that has both natural gas and electricity, where we're trying to leverage the cleaner energy sources, and that can be an important component in making this technology practical for Canadians to adopt. The other piece I would mention is with respect to Canadian energy end use mapping, where we're looking at leveraging big data, artificial intelligence technology, and spatial data through our labs to develop an online mapping application that allows our stakeholders to identify energy, emissions, and cost optimal opportunities for energy efficiency, and also selected renewables at the community level. So that's quite an interesting piece as well. Going to move on to next slide. Okay, so I just want to touch briefly on the development of smart grids and their role in reducing GHG emissions here in Canada. So this is something where we think there's both economic and social opportunities, for example, job creation. So we're looking to accelerate the development of smart grids. So smart grids help to ensure safer and more secure delivery of electricity, provide a foundation for new market structures, they add a higher quality of service and choice for our customers, and they help to mitigate GHG emissions because we're able to have more renewables in that mix. and they can improve asset utilization and increase reliability and resiliency, which also can enhance our cyber security. So there's a lot of components in there. We have a smart grid program where we're funding sort of promising near commercial demonstration of technologies and deployment in integrated systems. So the program was launched in 2018, early 2018, and it provides $100 million over 4 years to fund utility and system operator projects across Canada. So we've actually published a report on this. It's a public document, so if anyone's interested, they can search on NRCan Smart Grid in Canada 2018, and you'll find it, and it talks about the deployment and adoption of smart grid technologies. It also notes that over 82% of electricity meters in Canada now have smart functionalities. So, you know, to be honest, some of them are smarter than others, but I can say that less than 20% remain analog with no communication capabilities. And maybe just to, again, highlight some of what our utilities are doing, you know, in one of our northern territories, the Yukon. Currently, you know, we have one of our utilities is rolling out a new product with over 400 homes getting smart devices, and obviously the intent of that is to make the grid more efficient. So here in NRCan, we're tracking digitalization functionality around this in 7 key areas. So that includes advanced metering infrastructure, new markets and rate options, which is made possible through digitalization of supply, distribution and demand. We're also tracking demand response, distributed energy storage, grid automation, so in control room upgrades, and then grid connected microgrids and smart renewable off-grid microgrids, as well as advanced inverter functions. So each of these 7 indicators represent an application of digitalization for the grid, and they provide us a more detailed understanding of the emerging capabilities. So I also want to just note that, you know, the IEA put out a really excellent report in 2017, the Digitalization of Energy report, and we have begun and continue to embed more and more some of the no regrets actions that were outlined there. So, you know, we're putting that into practice across our department and with our partners. I just want to mention there's foresight and scanning that we're doing to understand how digitalization may affect Canada's energy system. I noted some of that previously. We're also recognizing that, you know, within government, we can sometimes operate the way we always have, and we're trying to set up new processes and systems that will look to engage teams in experimentation and to thinking about things more digitally. So from automation to integration of various systems. And, you know, I think this is something that represents quite a significant culture change. So it's not happening overnight, but I do think we're making important progress in those areas. We're also working with partners across the country to deliver new experiments and learn to do by doing pilot projects. So for example, in doing this, we're really looking to have a more user-centered approach to integrate emerging technologies and to amplify our existing programs and inform new policy pathways. And I think, you know, we run a pretty large program shop in here around energy efficiency, and we've undertaken a lot of experiments. And I mean, I say experiments loosely, but really what we're trying to do is really use new technologies and digitalization and AI to move our programs into a space that can both take advantage of these things and at the same time make people in the department and in the government more comfortable with these technologies. And like, for example, we have an EnerGuide labeling program for homes, vehicles, and appliances, and we've made a lot of use of digitalization to leverage the label in different ways. So improve user experience, improve awareness, and to provide Canadians with energy related information so they can make better decisions. So we're using our label in a much more proactive way than in the past. And as a result, you know, consumers can now use a smartphone to scan appliances, for example, in store, and draw comparisons in terms of long-term life cycle cost that's based on this information from the energy label. I'd also note that we're looking at our authorities and our underlying authorities with respect to, you know, legislation and regulation to ensure that we're going to have what we need as we move into a more and more digital era. So Maybe I will conclude there, and I'll just say thanks very much again, Brian, for the opportunity to talk about what we're doing in Canada. And I'm not sure how to turn it back over to you. Okay, Greg's going to help me.
Thanks, Joyce. We can wrest control from you at this end.
Okay, please do. Please wrest control.
So thank you very much indeed. That was very illuminating. A lot in common with what we heard from Alex in terms of seeing this technology development as an opportunity and to enable and to deliver other goals such as clean energy transition, affordability, but also you placed a lot of emphasis on people and the consumer experience and things like that. I thought that was very interesting. Also interesting to hear how it works in a federated model where you put a lot of emphasis on working at subnational, city and state level. So I think a lot of interesting lessons there that I'm sure will come up in the next parts of the discussion. So after those two excellent keynote statements, I think it's time for another live polling so we can hear from everybody. So Edith, would you do that for us, please?
Sure, thanks, Brian. So as you can see on your screens, if you can go back to that Menti link, and I can see people are already responding to the question. So the question this time is your jurisdiction ready to deploy the following demand-side resources? And here we have demand response, rooftop PV, behind-the-meter storage, and end-use energy efficiency measures. And we've already heard mention of all of these resources, actually. And again, this is a bit of a reality check. Similar to the question on the diffusion of digital technologies, because we talk about the need for flexibility on power systems, and we talk about the power of the customer, and of all of those kilowatts and kilowatt hours that can be shifted or saved, and we see that we're not necessarily ready yet based on the answers that we're seeing to which I don't think will surprise anyone, that we're not quite ready yet to deploy these resources to their full potential. And as I think we've been hearing and we'll hear further along, there are many reasons for this. And one of the things that the IEA is doing is to develop an evidence base and develop recommendations on how we can move these colorful dots to the right that you're seeing on your Menti poll. So with that, I think that we're going to shift now to the portion of the webinar where we have some really great international perspectives to share with you. So our first speaker will be Mohammed Al Mansoori Kebe, who's Chief of Department at Senelec Distribution in Senegal. So Mohammed, we're going to hand the presenter function and the mic over to you. So we can't hear you yet. It may be that you're muted on your side. No, still not. So we can see you on the screen and we see your presentation, but we can't hear you. So we still can't hear you, Mohammed. I'm not sure what the issue is on your side. But one thing that we might do is go on to the next presentation and come back to you, because on our side, we've unmuted you. So I think it's something perhaps on your computer. Okay, so thank you, Mohammed, for your patience, and we'll come back to you in the next presentation. And Sarah, I'd like to shift now to you. So to introduce the next speaker is Sarah Key-Bright, who's Practice Manager of Policy and Regulation at the Energy Systems Catapult in the UK.
thanks very much, Edith. Can you hear me well?
Yes, I can. Thank you.
Okay. So I'm sharing my screen. Can you see that okay?
Yes, we see you, we hear you, and we see your presentation.
Okay, thank you very much. Well, thank you very much for inviting me to join you today. I much appreciate it, and so does the Energy Systems Catapult. I'm going to talk to you, I'm going to focus my presentation on how we can make sure innovations get rolled out and scaled up through network regulation and through innovation program design. So I'm from the Energy Systems Catapult in the UK, and we are one of 10 catapults focused on different topic areas, and many of them have direct linkage to sustainable energy. I'm based in the Energy Systems Catapult, as I mentioned. The catapults are non-profit and independent of government, but they are part sponsored by the government and private sector money, and they are under Innovate UK, which is under a UK department for innovation and research. So the Energy Systems Catapult has about 170 innovation experts in it, with 2 centres in Birmingham and Derby. And we have a wide range of capabilities, including modelling, business development support, systems engineering, policy and regulation, and so on, a wide range of things. And one of the key things that sort of shapes our approach to the way we approach things, there are 3 things. One is taking a whole systems approach, so cross sectors and entire energy system across the entire value chain and all areas. The other is basing our approach on deep consumer insights, which is critical for successful business innovation and policy and regulation. And the third is promoting open and competitive markets, because we believe this is a key way of enabling innovation. So I want to start off by pointing you to Ofgem's RIA1 price control, which is currently active in the UK for network companies, and some of the design features that are in there to drive and enable innovation. So this price control regime was introduced in 2015, and it's running for 8 years to 2023. And on the left-hand side of this slide, you can see the features which are embedded in the price control framework, so the allowed revenues of the network companies. And one of the key features is a TOTEX approach, which is aimed at equalizing the incentives between capital expenditure and operational expenditure, so that companies are not biased towards capital expenditure and trying to enlarge their regulated asset base, because that's directly linked to their revenues and rate of return and so on, and to promote non-wires and non-build solutions. And the other is a direct link between incentives, because this is a performance-based price control, the link between incentives and innovation, and the sharing of resulting financial benefits between the companies and consumers. And for this particular price control, although it has been changed, but this one was, they extended the timeframe from 5 to 8 years to try to allow companies to take a longer term view and to retain the benefits that they could get from their investments for longer. On the right-hand side is the innovation stimulus package, which is separate from price control and consists of an annual competition, a limited funding allowance, and a mechanism to fund the rollout of successful innovation trials. And a key requirement of these mechanisms is that the projects funded generate learning for all the companies and share it with all network companies. And they must also contribute 10% of the project funding. Now, the NIA allowance funds the smaller projects, and so far at the time that this was evaluated, 500 electricity and 500 gas projects had been supported, but the Network Innovation Competition is funding for much larger strategic investments, and this is focused more on electricity, 70 million per year on electricity, 20 million per year on gas, 18 electricity projects so far and 7 gas. But the National Audit Office recently did an evaluation, and one of the things it did point out was that only 5 out of the 22 projects have been focused on decarbonisation of heat and transport, although all of them are supporting low carbon energy development. But, you know, it's been identified that heat and transport are priorities. So the entire framework will not be fully evaluated until 2023, but there have been interim evaluations. And so far, the learning that has come out of this particular price control in relation to innovation is that yes, this has really made a difference in improving the culture and the collaboration, including cross-sector thinking for the network companies, and that innovation strategies that the network companies have been required to develop have enabled a more cohesive approach to broader challenges, and the flexibility of the NIA allowance in particular, the NIA in particular, have allowed investment in a wide range of projects. But the issues raised, in particular, the difficulty of incorporating the innovative products and processes into business as usual. And also there's a stop-start element to within-year funding, which is holding back the spending. And finally, the scope of funding and the limitations of the requirement for projects to have a direct impact as opposed to indirect has been limiting as well. So recently, Ofgem has issued, actually, it was May last year, its decision on RIIO-2 and what that would mean for innovation. And there have been some changes based on what they've learned. Starting in the left-hand column, a key thing is that more innovation should become business as usual, and this should be driven through the price control. And that means that the columns to the right, the NIA and the new strategic innovation funding pot, should only really be awarded for those projects which could not be driven through the price control framework. In the price control framework, there's a new mechanism introduced called the business plan incentive. And this seeks to reward companies that offer consumers additional benefits and value for money through innovation, but it also applies penalties if the requirements fall short or if costs are not properly justified. And this sort of reward penalty mechanism has a limit of plus or minus 2% of the TOTEX. The fourth column highlights some interesting areas. So RIIO-2 is going to drive a lot more competition for the innovation funding, and the competition is going to be extended to all sectors. So if you're a distribution company, you've got to think beyond your sector. And they can promote innovation in any of the areas and think very broadly and holistically. And there must be whole systems in their approach and their thinking, so long as their own customers in their own sector, will gain, will have benefits. So next I want to talk to you about a major innovation program that has been launched in the UK in which the Energy Systems Catapult is involved. It is a large program, 102 million, which is invested in smart local energy systems. It is about half of the money is focused on demonstrators for integrated intelligent local systems and delivering power, heat, mobility and different services in different and better ways. There are 4 that are up and running, and they are doing different things. So, for example, LEO, Local Energy Oxfordshire, is replicating and trialing elements of a distribution operation coordination between the distribution system operator and the transmission system operator. Reflex in Orkney, where they have a lot of offshore wind, they are looking at one virtual controllable energy system. The third one, Smart Hubs in West Sussex, developing through a virtual power platform, integrated solutions, which integrates several platforms, including hydrogen, one for hydrogen. And the Falls Energy Superhub Oxford optimizes power direct from the transmission system and facilitates trading and aggregation direct into the transmission system. So these 4 demonstrators are up and running, and then there will be 10 or so, we call them detailed designs, but they're future designs. They're kind of concept projects that are put forward by the private sector through competition. So they're coming on stream now. And a key message from this slide is really the fact that about 17% of the total budget is invested in program integration services, which is where the Catapult comes in, with the Energy Revolution Integration Service, ERIS, and also with Energy Rev, which is a research consortium bringing together researchers from many different universities. So I'm going to talk a bit more about that, noting that it is a very substantial part of the budget. And the sole purpose of this particular part on program integration is to make sure that the program has impact and delivers results, particularly in terms of scalability, replicability, and investability. So expanding on this, ERIS, it provides whole system integration services to the programs and projects direct. It includes facilitation of knowledge sharing and integration and support with developing business models, addressing wider system issues and risk and so on. So it's really bottom up. Energy Rev, by contrast, involving, there we go, sorry, I need to use my, I've lost the screen. It involves 60 researchers from 22 universities, and they are, they're kind of top down. They're looking at the wider picture, how things intersect. They do full literature reviews, collecting the evidence, and looking at, obviously, at things from a whole systems viewpoint, and pulling on evidence that are coming from different parts of the world. And we work very closely with Energy Rev. And one of the things we're doing is systematically analyzing the policy and regulatory issues and risks and opportunities that are arising from these various projects, and work and trying to resolve them with the projects. And if necessary, we elevate these to government departments and the regulator in order to resolve the issues or to explore them or exploit them, and so on. And so this is currently a very active piece of work that's just started. This is a slide, just a little bit more detail on ERIS, which is what the Catapult is involved with and the kind of work that we do. But I'm going to move on because I know we're short on time. So expanding on the work that we're doing with Energy Rev, we are involved in the project evaluation. Another organization, Ipsos Mori, is also involved. And one of the things that we're looking at through ERIS is, I mentioned before, replicability, scalability, investability. And all the projects must evaluate this. So the scalability aspects to be addressed are the opportunity to recruit additional customers in the same location, the ability to expand the area covered, the challenges and opportunities posed when one smart local energy system is adjacent to another, and they interact, and the costs involved in scaling. And already the different demonstrators are looking at how to evaluate the different criteria. Well, particularly Reflex is looking at prospective sites that have criteria in common with its own site, and how the kind of criteria, things that will facilitate rollout, not just in the UK but also abroad. So it's so a lot of insight is going to come from these projects over the next year or two. The other thing I wanted to mention to you is the fact that some of these future projects coming on stream, particularly the smaller ones with the private sector, will require maybe the relaxation of policy and regulatory rules. And Ofgem, since 2015, I think, introduced the regulatory sandbox mechanism to allow this. So I'm just going to spend a minute to talk about this. It was launched in 2017, sorry. And so innovators can request to Ofgem, the regulator, to trial new products or services and to have an exemption from the usual rules, so they can test out business models and so on. And in the last month, I think this month, sorry, Ofgem has actually launched a new sandbox service, and it has made quite a few changes based on what it's learned from the previous experience. So what Ofgem learned was that innovators want access to the sandbox when they need it. And so therefore Ofgem is going to be much more responsive and provide an on-demand service, whereas before the innovators had to wait. The scope of the rules covered was deemed to be too narrow and really restricted what could be tried out. So a lot of work has gone into, particularly with respect to different codes that set the specific rules in relation to license conditions and all sorts of ways that the market actors must operate. So a lot of the codes have been what they call them code tools, but to enable the possibility that they can be relaxed for the purposes of trialing in innovation. And the Code of Administrators have introduced a new innovation principle into their collective code of practice. So some significant changes there to expand the scope. Innovators also want to launch the businesses. They don't necessarily want to do trials. So they're going to provide the possibility that derogations could be applied to support market entry. Also, startups want to signal low regulatory risks to investors, and there was a lot of uncertainty before whether or not something was possible. So, Ofgem is going to be more active or proactive in confirming whether or not something can be permitted. Innovators also want clarity and good guidance about the support available. And finally, this is a really interesting one. That a lot of innovators actually need guidance and information about the current policy and regulatory framework because it is quite complex, it's fast moving and changing. And this is actually a lot of the work that RS and Energy Rev do with the projects at the moment, is inform them about these changes and what it means for their project. It helps them also to be adaptable and make sure that their business models can weather the transition and be resilient, which is a really, really important part of our work. But it's interesting that since 2017, there was 37 expressions of interest for the sandbox, but only 4 were taken up. That's because so many just needed support to better understand the energy sector. So that is, I will conclude on that slide. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, and thanks for the very interesting presentation, particularly this connection between innovation, regulation, and what innovators really need to be able to scale up these kinds of projects. So just a reminder to please type your questions into the question box. You can type them in any time, and we'll bring up as many questions as we can at the end, but we'll also use these questions to inform our work. So we are very interested to hear what you have to say. So I'd like to invite Dr. Kebe now to join us, and I think that we've resolved the problem with the sound now. So Dr. Kebe, the floor is yours. So we're seeing your screen, and now we see you as well. But we still can't hear you. So I think we might move to the next presentation and then come back to you at the end, because we're still not hearing you, unfortunately. Yeah, no, we can't hear anything. Okay, so I think, so in the interest of time, we're going to ask our next speaker to step in, and then we'll come back to Dr. Kebe at the end. So our next speaker is Robert Denda, who's head of network technology and innovation infrastructure in the infrastructure and network division of Enel. So Robert, the floor is now yours.
You can hear me? Can you hear me?
Yes, we hear you, see you, and we see your presentation. Thank you.
Okay, perfect. So thank you very much. Yeah, hello everybody, and thanks first of all to be invited here to represent what we are doing at Enel in terms of grid digitalization. As you probably know, at Enel we are a leading utility in many sectors. Today I will speak about the infrastructure networks part. We are present in 8 countries in the areas where we own and operate and distribute energy and manage grids. And those countries are Italy, Spain, Romania, and also in Latin America. We are present in Argentina, Chile, Colombia, Peru, and Brazil. That's a total of 72 million customers in the grid. So, and you probably heard what we've done also in the past in terms of technology, because I think unlikely to many other utilities, we also have a very strong focus on technological development and engineering. And I'll come back to this in a bit. So if you can see what I'm presenting here, let me just give you a very short focus of why we believe that the digitalization of the grid is so important. I think a little bit also the previous speakers have mentioned that, but it's clear that due to the increase of decentralized generation on one side and the electrification of everything almost, on the other side, the power flows that go through the grids are becoming more and more complex and bidirectional. They are not just flowing in one direction, they change over time, even during the same day. So the grids that were many times constructed many years ago, of course, need to manage this flexibility and this dynamic and this complexity. And this can only be done by introducing digital technologies in the grid that on one side help to monitor what is going on, and on the other side also to control, of course, and even reconfigure the grid where necessary. And that means that, of course, many digital technologies need to be implemented in the grid. And here we speak about smart meters, we speak about remote control, distribution automation, and many other things. And at the same time, this really strong digitalization of the grid and also, of course, of the workers of the company to automate the processes will also allow and is allowing to offer also a more digital connection to the customers, and that's also important. So at the same time that we are able to manage this complexity through the digital technologies, we are also enabling a platform, an ecosystem that provides digital flows to the customers to have more real-time responses to the demands and information availability, real-time digital flows of the workers, of everything that is going on in the field, and at the same time the actual management of the grid. So that's why also we put in this slide here the grid in the middle, because the digital grid helps to create this ecosystem of multidimensional flows on the energy side and in the digital domain. So what we see at Enel, that there's a path in this data-driven movement. Let's say we of course, smart grid technologies is the basis and the foundation, and really to make this grid digital. Then there's grid flexibility, that is a main use case provided also through this digitalization. Without this digitalization, it's not possible. And then I will speak later also a little bit about our network digital twin. So if I go to the first part, smart grid technologies at Enel, we operate 45 million smart meters in different countries. For example, in Italy and Spain, we have a full rollout of smart meters. In Italy, actually, since 2000, the year 2000, we started with smart meters, are right now in our third technological generation of smart meters. And something very important here is that the meter really is a low voltage grid sensor as well. So it's not just an instrument to measure data and send information about the consumption to the customer. Of course, that's very important. But at the same time, it also provides very valuable information in real time almost of what is going on at the low voltage side of the grid. And this information is then integrated in the digital domain in order to manage better the grid. And this really has a huge effect on efficiency and even resiliency that also was mentioned before. If we look at the smart grids on the medium voltage and also low voltage side, some examples what we did so far, in the case of Italy, for example, we are implementing and deploying a solution that allows to perform real-time self-healing in less than 1 second in the medium voltage side. So that means healthy sections of the grid. So customers that if there's a fault in the grid can be recovered, and this all of this is done automatically in a distributed way in less than 1 second. So those customers don't even notice this micro outage, let's say, that they might have. In the past, traditional operation without those technologies, of course, could mean hours or even days of outage, which is by those digital technologies, of course, overcome. At the same time, of course, there's a lot of work in sensors and in the grid. Cybersecurity was mentioned before by Alex, and I completely agree that's very important and needs to be there in terms of technology by design in all those digital technologies that are implemented in the grid, and also on the workforce side. You see some pictures here of drones, and what we do also, we use the same technologies, by the way, on the grid, but also in those areas where we have the concession of the distribution areas, but are that need to have microgrid implementations because they are so far away, let's say, from the reachable distance for connection. So in very rural areas, those microgrids use also the same technologies. Now, let me speak a little bit about the network digital twin, which I think is probably interesting for you. It's quite a novel concept because here we speak about technologies that, in addition to the typical SCADA, remote control solutions, smart metering, and so on, that already help digitizing the grid and creating the smart grid. With the network digital twin, we actually build up a virtual digital replica of the actual infrastructure, of the grid infrastructure, with real-time information. So it's updated in real time, and this information in real time then allows to create a model that enables us to simulate things, to react much faster, to have a more precise overview what is going on. And this is really the new dimension that is just became possible through also new technologies that appeared. And if I go through the different parts of the network digital twin, let me start with this part, with what we call the foundation layer. What we do is basically we scan our infrastructure, the physical infrastructure, so our primary, secondary substations, the lines, overhead lines, but also even through georadar, the underground layout of the grids. And all of this allows us to create a real three-dimensional representation of the actual infrastructure that is completely accurate. And actually here we speak about even 6 dimensions, because of course this changes over time, and we have information about the technical information about those elements related in the network digital twin, and also information about the cost of each element. And all of this, already that is a huge value, having not just the electrical schemes and schematics available, but also the digital information about the infrastructure, because that allows you to do virtual inspections, better network planning. It allows you to optimize already the operation and maintenance. So that is just the foundation layer. That is, of course, a huge effort. In our case, we have over 2 million kilometers of lines, for example, that over time, of course, it will be digitized in this way. Then the next layer, the second layer, here we call this layer dynamic device and sensor data, actually brings the dynamics into the network digital twin, because it actually integrates sensors, it integrates information from the smart meters, the smart grid devices that I mentioned before, protections, RTUs, and so on. It also enables the monitoring of the transformers, the medium to low voltage transformers, and we do this in the different countries where we are mainly Italy, Spain, and Brazil, but also bring this to the other countries where we are. And this creates a dynamic view then of this digital twin. So the models actually updated through dynamic information that comes from these different systems and creates this huge data lake of information on which then, and as a third level, we apply artificial intelligence in order to do automated network modeling, predictive maintenance. It helps us to detect anomalies, also through AI, and to simulate actually to what happens if. So if we increase those lines, if we do certain activities, and that is very important. At the same time, of course, those techniques allow us to further increase and optimize also the safety of our people. And this is really a huge value that is behind this concept, that the model, having an accurate model and this huge data lake available, you can apply so many things, and it's of course a path, it's a route of things that can be done. At the same time, also it allows us to communicate the information that is out there to our people in a completely different way. It helps us, of course, because if you look at the workforce that already in our case is equipped with smartphones and has a completely integrated view of what is going on, we actually can have so many different things like augmented reality overlays, for example, in the smartphones, where you can then in the field have access to the information of the network digital twin on top of the actual reality that you see. And this is something that we've deployed, for example, in Italy, and are bringing also to the other countries. Virtual reality for training is another part where technologies are very important, because they allow to actually do things that you need to do in the field, that an operator needs to do in the field, to do them first in a safe environment of virtual reality. And it actually works very well, and the operators really like it, because they can experiment all the different scenarios, following the rules for safety, following the procedures, and see how the work is done before actually doing them in the field. And this also, in terms of safety, helps quite a lot. So all of those things together are actually what we believe is the next level of smart grids, because it does not mean just introducing digital information coming from smart meters and other devices. It actually means building up the complete model of the grid, of the full infrastructure. And with the dimension that I mentioned to you at the beginning, of course, you can imagine the complexity also behind. There's a lot of work behind, but having this is a great value for us. And at the same time, we believe also that this data that we collect in order to build up our network digital twin, at the same time also is a very valuable piece of data also for others, because what we're doing, for example, in São Paulo, we have a very nice project that we launched last year, which we call Urban Futurability. And there, for example, we implement the network digital twin in a certain area, digitalizing completely our network, digitizing our network and all the surroundings. And there we work together with the local stakeholders, municipalities, local companies, startups, and so on, to really build an ecosystem, a digital ecosystem, where this information is of value not only for us as a distribution system operator, but also for the city and the local stakeholders. And this goes a little bit also, I think, in the direction of what Alex mentioned before when he spoke about the grid interactive efficient buildings, because of course the same can also be connected to the buildings. If we think about the full digitalization of the network and the buildings, we can really create this systemic efficiency, bring those two worlds together, And I think this is really the next level of cooperation in the digital world, also between utility companies and local stakeholders in urban environments, in order to jointly achieve zero carbon areas, to greater efficiency in areas, and also to improve at the end quality of life, especially in urban scenarios, but for sure also in the future in less urban scenarios. And here in the systemic efficiency between building efficiency and grid digitalization, I think there's a lot of work that needs to be done, but there's a huge potential. So that is basically what I wanted to present from our side. And of course, I'm happy to answer questions on that. Thank you.
Thank you very much, and a very interesting presentation. So unfortunately, we're unable to show the third presentation that we wanted to show today, but we'll talk offline and see if perhaps we can share the presentation with everyone afterwards. So I'd like to take one of the questions that we see in the question box. And Robert, since you just spoke, I think we'll keep you up for this question, which is, can you comment on the cost of this digital twin project, and not just the cost, but also the benefits and the scalability of this kind of technology?
Okay, yeah, the cost is an interesting aspect, and I think here, if you think about it, at the end, in order to, what do you need to do, to actually digitize not only the grid itself, but also the infrastructure, the cables, everything that is out there. You typically do this by video imaging or by laser scans, thermal cameras, and these type of devices. So of course, there's an upfront cost if you're a utility company you need to procure yourself with those devices, or with a service, of course. On the other side, what we already did is we implemented the digitization part in our regular operation. So when our field people go out there to do repair work, for example, in a substation, the first thing they do, they put a mobile scanner in the substation, and during the time when they work, they scan also the substation. So and the same also with the digitization of the surroundings. And this means that at the end, there's really a marginal cost to this digitization if you have enough time to do it, because you just put it on your regular operation as additional work that can be done simultaneously. The same also with visual inspection of lines. You just capture the data with the cameras or LiDAR and need to integrate them in this global data lake. So if you're a utility company, you can do this. If the data, there's of course a huge data value of the data behind, and this we will experiment also, I think, with the different scenarios. What we see, of course, the biggest value at the moment in urban scenarios.
Thank you very much. So a question for Sarah, if you're still there. So there's a quote that I wrote down of something that you said that I thought was interesting. You said innovators want to launch businesses, not do trials. And this is really one of the fundamental issues that we see, is this issue of scalability and how we move to where it's not just a bunch of trials by small companies, but actually we see the businesses growing. And particularly when we talk about demand side resources and demand side flexibility, we see a lot of challenges. So could you comment on kind of a combination of how quickly you think these iterations of the price control framework and the sandboxes that the UK regulator is putting in place, do you see a real growth in the market, and how long before we really move towards seeing these businesses really grow and take hold? So I'm not sure that we still have Sarah there. So I'm going to leave that question hanging as an important question that we're asking ourselves at the IEA. And I think now what I'd like to do is go back to another poll and close with something interactive. So if you don't mind going back to the...
Oh, hello, sorry.
Okay,
sorry.
Okay, so let's pause that, and Sarah, please.
Yeah, I am sorry. I was fighting to be unmuted. You were muting me and I was muting myself. So yeah, that's a good question. It's hard to say, isn't it? But what we must anticipate is growth in these, small companies, businesses, as things take hold, and as the policy and regulatory frameworks enable the business to grow. So a lot of our work in the Catapult is looking, yes, at the policy and regulatory barriers, but it's other kinds of barriers too. And sometimes you may find that they then have a link to there could be an opportunity for government intervention that you might not categorize necessarily as policy and innovation, but or regulation. But it's something I think that what I tried to say in my presentation was the importance of designing programs and regulatory frameworks that allow this responsiveness and this agility. To be able to adapt programs and frameworks, to adapt the rules, to listen to what the businesses are saying and to respond to them. And this isn't always easy because we've set our systems up in a certain way and we have a certain way of working, but it requires that scrutiny and action and working in partnership with many different actors that are able to pull different levers and so on. So it is quite complex, and I'm quite new with the Catapult. I've only been working there since November, but it's clear that this is a really valuable part of the the picture that I never really appreciated fully until I really worked here. So yeah, that's all I would say.
Thanks a lot for that. So we're nearly at time, or we're 1 minute past time. So I think we're going to go back to this poll, and we'll close on that. So we'll close actually with seeing what the audience thinks about one more question. So if you can go back to the Menti app, and you should be seeing a question coming up momentarily. So the question we have now is, what are the top 3 factors disrupting power systems today? And this is in the shape of a word cloud, so we'll see the responses coming up. And I see that as we had this morning, there's a difference of opinion in how the term digitalization is spelled, reflecting geographic splits. I would spell it with a Z. And I would not call it a Z. And we see a lot of other, probably not surprising factors. We see here climate change. So we see the role of policy. We see renewables, flexibility, pricing. We see efficiency as well. So we have one more question that I think we can go to. So if we go to the next question. And this is a write-in question, so you just type in your answer. What is needed to enable flexible, smart/digital power systems that leverage the demand side? And here we just see the responses come up in text boxes in full. And as I said, we'll show a few of the answers as they come up, and we'll continue to collect them and send them around afterwards. And they also give us an idea of what the experts who have connected to the webinar today have to say about the question. Yeah, so we see here some of the issues that came up in the discussion today. We see regulatory frameworks, we see policies coming up quite a bit, but we also see the role of technology, markets, of course, and also how we engage the consumers, which is really a tricky issue because we get into not just technology and policy, but also behavioral issues and acceptance. So I think with that, I think I'll give the last word to you, Brian, to close the webinar. Thank you.
So Edith, thank you, and thank you again to all our participants online. It was great to have so many people involved, and it's great to see so many of you contributing to the polling and to the question box as well. We didn't have time to get to all of the questions, but we have all of your questions and comments with us, and we hope to follow up on many of these issues. And again, a particular thanks to all of our speakers. We heard some great perspectives from different parts of the world, and real sense of excitement about the level of activity that's going on, and how strategic it is in terms of its focus on using digital technologies to enhance other goals at a national, at a business level. So I think that was really positive. So again, I'd like to thank you all for joining us. Do please follow up with us. As we've said very clearly, digitalization is across all aspects of our thinking at the IEA, and we really want to hear from you all. We want to stay in touch. You'll be seeing a lot of analysis coming out from the agency this year, but we depend on you to feed into us in terms of your experience and ideas. So we do hope to hear from you all. So thank you very much for being with us today, and we hope to talk to you again soon. Thank you. Goodbye.